You think you control your words, but your words control you. One careless sentence can reveal motives you have hidden for many years. Someone who understands these slips can read you faster than any test. You already know the polished version of yourself, the version you prepare for the world. You plan your answers, you edit your opinions, you practice reasonable reactions. But your deeper motives do not live in those polished parts of you. They live under pressure, in the space between thought and speech. And that space is where verbal slips are born. A verbal slip is not always a dramatic mistake or an obvious error. Sometimes it is one wrong word, one extra phrase, one strange correction. You say something, then you quickly say you did not mean it. You laugh it off, you blame tiredness, you say it was just a joke. But the mind rarely wastes effort creating words without any hidden direction. Machiavelli once said that when a person speaks in fear, truth escapes faster. Fear breaks rehearsal, fear interrupts performance, fear exposes unprotected intention. Your verbal slips often happen when your mind is juggling many internal conflicts. You are trying to look kind, but you also feel angry and resentful. You are trying to look confident, but you are afraid of being rejected. You are trying to look innocent, but you know you are hiding something important. Each time your mind holds two motives at once, it creates tension in speech. The tongue becomes a battlefield between what you want and what you allow. When pressure rises, one side attacks through an unplanned word or phrase. That is why your mouth sometimes defends you and sometimes quietly betrays you. A trained manipulator does not listen to your main message only. They listen to corrections, they listen to sudden jokes, they listen to soft contradictions. They listen to how you repair a sentence that accidentally sounded too honest. For them, the repair is more valuable than the sentence you tried to protect. Notice how often you say, "I did not mean that." Notice how often you say, "I am just kidding." Notice how often you say, "Forget what I said." These phrases are not neutral. They are alarm bells around deeper motives. Your mind is trying to pull words back inside, but it is too late. There are many kinds of verbal slips, but one pattern is very common. You reveal a motive, then you cover it with a socially acceptable mask. For example, you express envy, then you decorate it with fake admiration. You express contempt, then you hide it behind clever humor. You express fear, then you coat it with intellectual language or cold logic. Albert Bandura once said that real intention hides in small, spontaneous acts. If you translate this to language, the real intention hides in small slips. A manipulator who understands this does not need your full confession. They only need 10 situations where your mouth contradicts your controlled image. From those 10 contradictions, they build a silent psychological map of you. This hidden map includes what you secretly desire, but never admit openly. It includes who you quietly dislike while acting perfectly polite on the surface. It includes what you fear losing and what you would sacrifice to keep it. It includes your fragile points, where one sharp phrase can break your control. Verbal slips also appear when you try too hard to look morally superior. You want to appear pure, harmless, always kind, always understanding. But the human mind is not that clean. It contains rivalry, frustration, and ego. When you oversell your goodness, small words reveal the parts you suppressed. Your mouth might subtly blame others, even inside sentences that sound caring. Your tone might sharpen for 1 second on a certain topic. That sharp second becomes a slip, even if the words seem neutral. A silent observer does something you rarely do. They link your slips together. They remember how you spoke about status, how you spoke about loyalty. They notice which topics make your grammar break or your speed change. They notice when your vocabulary becomes harsher only for one type of person. They notice how often you distance yourself from your own statements. Over time, these observations form a structure, not random notes. Your slips begin to repeat. They follow predictable emotional circuits. Your mouth betrays you in similar ways, in similar emotional climates. The same insecurity returns in different conversations, wearing slightly different clothes. This repetition proves something important. The slip is not random, it is a pattern. You have been trained since childhood to manage image more than motive. You learn what to say to be liked, accepted, and praised. You build ready-made sentences for sensitive topics, like reputation and loyalty. But the deeper motive never fully accepts this training without resistance. It waits for cognitive load, stress, or emotional activation, then it pushes out. A manipulator understands that control is easier when you talk more. The more you talk, the more likely a slip will appear. This is why some people keep you speaking with gentle questions. They act curious, they act harmless, they look like they just enjoy conversation. In reality, they are measuring when your prepared mask fails for 1 second. Every time you rush to correct a sentence, your mind reveals a hierarchy. What you said first and what you replaced it with are not equal. The first sentence often belongs to the motive, the second belongs to the image. The manipulative listener quietly stores both and trusts the first more. This single habit gives them an unfair advantage over your self-awareness. You probably think you can fix this by speaking more carefully. You imagine you will slow down, filter every word, review every sentence. But total control is impossible because real life does not wait. Emotion accelerates speech, stress compresses thinking, surprise disables rehearsal. Under those conditions, your deeper motives always search for a way out. The disturbing part is simple. Your slips do not only expose what you hide. They also expose which hidden motives are strong enough to override your training. These are the motives a manipulator will target first, because they are alive. They will not attack your perfect sentences, they will attack your repeated slips. So the real threat is not that you sometimes say the wrong thing. The real threat is that someone could quietly collect those wrong moments. If a person builds their power on your own unguarded words, what happens next? You think you guard your intentions well, but your speech releases signals you never approved. You believe your silence protects you, yet your spoken corrections reveal more than silence ever could. You assume people hear your message, but they study your mistakes with sharper interest. When you speak, your mind performs 2 jobs at once. The first job is expression, the second job is protection. Expression wants release, protection wants control. When these 2 forces collide, your mouth creates fractures in meaning. These fractures are the verbal slips you never plan to share. A manipulative thinker never reacts to your main phrase. They wait for cracks, they wait for pressure, they wait for small inconsistencies. They understand that truth rarely appears in a full sentence. Truth appears in one unexpected word, placed at the wrong psychological moment. Machiavelli once said that a person reveals weakness through correction. The correction tells the observer more than the original mistake did. Your attempt to repair a phrase exposes the motive behind your repair. You say something sharp, then you quickly soften it. The first sharp part hints at raw emotion, the soft part hints at fear of judgment. Together they form a pattern that is impossible to hide once noticed. The second verbal slip happens when you speak with forced confidence. Forced confidence is smooth on the surface, but unstable underneath. You stretch your tone, you widen your vocabulary, you add clever phrases. But pressure reveals the truth. Your words begin to outrun your thoughts. When that happens, your speech exposes motives you tried to bury under performance. A trained manipulator watches for overcompensation. They listen for sentences that sound too polished or too rehearsed. They listen for praise that feels mechanical or criticism that feels too indirect. They know the mind uses forced politeness to hide unresolved inner rivalry. In those moments, you sound calm, but your word choice points toward hidden tension. Sometimes the slip is not the wrong word, but the wrong speed. You rush through dangerous topics. You slow down during personal exposure. Speed is a psychological measurement, not just a speech pattern. Fast speech often protects insecurity, while slow speech conceals calculation. The shift between these speeds reveals motives more accurately than tone alone. You may think you can hide by using neutral language. Neutrality feels safe, emotionless, controlled, simple. But neutrality that comes too quickly becomes suspicious. You remove emotion before the listener even senses emotion. You cut your sentences short, fearing they might expose your real stance. This fear itself becomes a slip, because only someone hiding tension does this. Another slip occurs when you distance yourself from your own statements. You say things like people say instead of I believe. You use phrases like some think instead of I think. This linguistic distance reveals a fear of responsibility. Your motives remain active, but you refuse ownership with subtle phrasing. A manipulator knows this indicates internal conflict around that topic. Albert Bandura once said that intention leaks through unintended signals. Speech is full of such signals, especially when you speak about control or power. You might try to hide your desire for approval, but your vocabulary exposes you. You might try to hide your fear of loss, but your tone cracks around sensitive ideas. You might try to hide resentment, but your metaphors reveal where the resentment lives. Verbal slips also appear when someone challenges your boundaries. Your words become unstable when you sense disrespect or threat. You try to answer calmly, yet your phrasing becomes sharper for one instant. The slip is not the sharpness itself, but the quick apology that follows. The apology is the mind trying to pull anger back inside before it is seen. That pull is the signal a manipulator observes most. People who understand hidden psychology do not chase your emotional storms. They chase your micro-fractures, the moments you lose internal alignment. Every slight inconsistency in your language becomes a clue they store. These clues help them predict your decisions with painful accuracy. Consider how often you say, "Forget what I said." This phrase is a confession that the first version carried truth. Consider how often you say, "I meant it differently." This phrase reveals that the first meaning was the raw version. Consider how often you add unnecessary humor to soften a sincere idea. Humor becomes a shield, not a form of expression, and the shield exposes fear. You rarely notice how much your mind reveals through tiny linguistic footprints. You believe your slip is unnoticed because most people do not confront you. But silence does not equal ignorance. Silence sometimes equals calculation. The listener may already be adjusting their strategy based on your slip. The most dangerous part is not the slip itself. The danger is repetition, because repetition marks the motive as stable. If a person hears the same type of slip in different situations, they gain insight. They know which pressure points activate your hidden intentions. They know which triggers break your control without fail. Your words may feel safe, but they act like open signals under observation. And if someone is quietly collecting your signals, what advantage will they gain next? You believe you speak with intention, yet your intention leaks before you notice. You think your logic protects you, yet emotion often slips out disguised as correction. You assume you reveal nothing important, yet your smallest verbal shift exposes your core. A verbal slip often begins before the sentence forms. Your mind prepares two paths, the path you want to show and the path you hope stays hidden. Both paths move toward speech at the same time, and conflict creates distortion. This distortion appears as hesitation, contradiction, or unnecessary explanation. You feel it as discomfort, but a trained observer sees it as revelation. Most people assume a verbal slip is just a mistake. But mistakes follow patterns, and patterns reveal psychological truth. When the same motive leaks through different conversations, the motive becomes undeniable. You may hide resentment with politeness, ambition with humility, or envy with praise. Yet your mouth produces small contradictions that point directly to these motives. This is why subtle observers rarely challenge your words directly. They let you speak freely because your unfiltered phrases are more revealing. Their silence is not respect, their silence is data collection. They watch the moment your smooth tone breaks for 1 second. They notice when your confident speech trembles around certain topics. They notice when your vocabulary becomes defensive instead of expressive. Machiavelli once said that true desires escape when a person tries to appear harmless. Harmlessness requires control, and control requires energy. Under stress, that energy drains, and your deeper motives rise to the surface. This is why verbal slips increase when you feel evaluated or misunderstood. You try to repair the situation, but your repair becomes another signal. The third pattern of slip appears through misplaced emphasis. You highlight the wrong part of a sentence without realizing it. Your intonation stretches, your pitch drops or rises unnaturally. This emphasis betrays emotional charge hidden beneath a rational explanation. Someone trained in dark psychology listens to emphasis, not just to content. You may say a neutral sentence, yet one word becomes heavier than the rest. That heavy word exposes emotional weight, even when the meaning stays calm. You cannot hide this weight because it comes from memory and subconscious motive. The mind stores emotional pressure in language before storing it in action. Another common slip appears when you try to look superior or overly composed. Excessive composure is a mask, and masks need constant maintenance. When your mask slips, you compensate with complex phrasing or intellectual tone. You begin explaining more than necessary because you fear appearing exposed. This over-explanation reveals insecurity more clearly than silence ever could. Albert Bandura once said that intention becomes visible when a person overjustifies small acts. Overjustification appears in speech through repeated clarifications and excuses. You insist you meant nothing harmful, even when nothing harmful was assumed. You explain your motive 3 times, even though once was enough. These unnecessary layers of language show that something inside you feels at risk. Another slip occurs when you deny too quickly. You reject an idea before the listener finishes suggesting it. Your speed reveals unprocessed fear or guilt, even when your words sound innocent. The denial is not suspicious because of its content, but because of its urgency. Urgent speech is not controlled speech. It is defensive instinct escaping early. Verbal slips grow stronger when you think someone is reading your intention. Suddenly your mind works harder to monitor every word. Monitoring increases stress, and stress increases leakage. Your desire to hide becomes the very force that exposes what you hide. This paradox follows you into every conversation without your awareness. Most people do not know how predictable these slips are. They think each slip is unique, but the underlying motive repeats itself. One person always slips when discussing fairness because they fear being overlooked. Another slips when discussing loyalty because they fear abandonment. Another slips when discussing success because they feel undeserving inside. The situations differ, but the internal pressure is identical. A manipulative thinker does not attack you with accusations. Instead, they let you speak until you contradict yourself in small ways. They mark these contradictions and track their emotional context. Over time, they know which topics weaken your mental defense. They know which motives dominate your decision-making. This knowledge gives them power without direct confrontation. They shape conversations to activate your predictable slips. They guide you toward verbal traps you never detect. They position themselves as emotionally stable while you appear inconsistent. And inconsistency creates social vulnerability, even when unintended. You may think you can fix this by staying silent. But silence changes nothing because your internal motives remain active. Once you speak again, the leaks return with the same intensity. Your mind cannot rewrite its deeper motives just to maintain image. Your words will always expose the truth your ego tries to hide. The unsettling question remains, if someone has already mapped your verbal slips, what influence can they now exert over you? You think your speech is a shield, yet your shield opens at the slightest pressure. You trust your self-control, yet your deeper drives speak before you approve them. You believe you reveal nothing important, yet every correction becomes a confession. Verbal slips evolve through layers, and the fourth layer is the most silent. This layer hides inside the structure of your sentences, not the words themselves. Your mind arranges ideas in a certain order, and this order reveals your priorities. Your priorities are the blueprint of your motives, even when you deny those motives. You may say a balanced sentence, but the sequence of ideas exposes intention. You mention your benefit first, then you mention fairness later. You mention your discomfort first, then you add logic after that. You mention your suspicion first, then you soften it with polite phrasing. The order in which your ideas appear shows where your true focus lives. Machiavelli once said that motive reveals itself in the first impulse, not the final decision. In speech, the first impulse is the first phrase you choose. The second impulse is the correction that follows when you fear judgment. Observers who understand hidden psychology trust the first impulse completely. A manipulative thinker studies your ordering patterns. They notice if you justify yourself before being questioned. They notice if you defend someone before expressing your true view. They notice if you accuse subtly before pretending neutrality. Each order reveals whether you protect your image or your fear. Verbal slips also appear when you shift from certainty to uncertainty too quickly. You begin a sentence firmly, but halfway through your tone collapses. This collapse exposes the point where your prepared image can no longer support the truth. You might say, "I am sure," then finish with a phrase that contradicts certainty. The contradiction is small, but it reveals the instability you tried to hide. The fourth slip appears through sudden distancing language. You start speaking personally, then retreat into abstract ideas. You switch from "I think" to "people usually think" without noticing. This shift shows you want to escape responsibility for your own thoughts. It also shows discomfort around the emotional weight of the topic. Albert Bandura once said that people reveal their fears through avoidance more than expression. Avoidance in speech is subtle. You move away from a subject while pretending to stay on it. Your words circle the topic instead of touching it directly. Your phrasing grows vague, your examples become general, your tone becomes flat. This avoidance is a slip, because only a threatened motive demands evasion. Another slip emerges when you try to sound morally consistent. You use repetitive phrasing to protect your identity as a fair and balanced person. But repetition signals insecurity, not confidence. If your moral stance was stable, you would not need repeated reassurance. You use phrases like "I always try," or "I never intend" far more than necessary. This habit reveals fear of being exposed as contradictory. A manipulator recognizes moral repetition as a vulnerability. They can pressure you by hinting that you violated your own stated principles. When you rush to reaffirm your identity again, you create more slips. You expose which principles matter the most to your self-image. And anything tied to self-image becomes a psychological lever. Another slip appears through tone mismatch. You discuss something serious with unusual lightness, or something light with unusual tension. Tone mismatch exposes emotional conflict. The mind cannot maintain internal equilibrium. You attempt to hide discomfort, but your tone refuses to obey. Experienced listeners focus on tone before content, because tone is older than language. When your tone wavers, your emotional truth briefly becomes visible. You may say you are fine, but your vocal rhythm trembles for a second. You may say you do not care, but your volume increases unnaturally. You may say you trust someone, but your pitch tightens around their name. These tonal slips are some of the clearest windows into your unfiltered motives. The fourth type of betrayal arises through contradiction between verbal and nonverbal timing. You pause at the wrong moment or speak too fast at a sensitive moment. Your rhythm breaks, sentence structure stretches, breath control weakens. Your physiology enters the conversation even when your mind tries to avoid it. The manipulative observer synchronizes these timings with your chosen words. From this combination, they predict your emotional triggers with unsettling accuracy. You may think these signals are too subtle for anyone to decode. But in dark psychology, subtle signals hold the greatest value. Observers do not need perfect precision, they need patterns. Patterns give them a map of your emotional landscape, including your weak points. Another slip appears when you replace a direct statement with a safer conditional. You say "maybe" instead of "I believe." You say "perhaps" instead of "I want." You say "it could be" instead of "it is." These linguistic safety nets exist because you fear committing to your real motive. Your avoidance of commitment exposes your anxiety about potential consequences. Your mind tries to disguise motive by hiding it under indirect phrasing. But indirect phrasing increases complexity, and complexity invites leakage. The more you hide, the more tangled your language becomes. The more tangled your language becomes, the easier it is to expose tension. A manipulator listens for these tangled zones, because each one reveals a crowded thought pattern. Crowded thoughts signal unresolved emotions, and unresolved emotions are easy to influence. Your speech tells them where to push, how hard to push, and when to stop. Another verbal slip is premature justification. You defend your actions before anyone evaluates them. You explain your intention before expressing the action itself. This early justification shows a hidden fear of being misunderstood or blamed. The fear becomes the real motive that controls your decisions. Verbal slips do not appear randomly, they appear where motive meets pressure. You cannot hide the places where your mind feels threatened. You cannot hide the places where your ego feels exposed. You cannot hide the places where your values conflict with your impulses. These conflicts shape the architecture of your sentence patterns. You may believe you can train yourself to avoid slips. But training only strengthens performance, not motive. Your deeper motives remain untouched, and untouched motives always find expression. Sooner or later, pressure exposes what discipline tries to bury. The unsettling truth is simple. Your speech already reveals more about you than you consciously know. And if someone has learned to read your patterns with precision, what control might they gain once they understand your triggers completely? You believe you speak with calm clarity, yet your mind releases signals hidden beneath reason. You trust your practiced phrases, yet the pressure of emotion bends them without warning. You assume your intentions stay protected, yet your smallest linguistic shift opens the door. As verbal slips evolve, the fifth layer becomes the most revealing. This layer does not live in your words or tone alone. It lives in the conflict between desire and restraint. Your deeper motives push upward, your conscious mind pushes downward. The tension between these forces becomes audible in ways you never planned. One of the most powerful slips appears through unconscious prioritization. You reveal what you value by what you defend first. You reveal what you fear by what you excuse first. You reveal what you desire by what you emphasize repeatedly. These patterns exist even in sentences that sound completely neutral. Machiavelli once said that people confess their motives not through honesty, but through urgency. Urgency exposes what you cannot afford to lose, even when your words remain controlled. You may claim you are fine, yet your immediate defense of a single point exposes inner attachment. You may say something is unimportant, yet you speak too quickly to protect it. Speed becomes confession, not intention. The fifth slip emerges when your emotional truth and your verbal truth collide. You attempt to sound calm, but your phrasing grows sharper. You try to appear indifferent, but your vocabulary reveals investment. You say you are not bothered, yet your clarity drops exactly at the sensitive point. This sharp drop is not random, it is the mark of internal friction. A trained manipulator listens for friction more than content. Friction shows where your mind struggles to maintain composure. Friction shows which subjects destabilize you instantly. Friction shows where your boundaries weaken without external pressure. These zones become psychological entry points. Another slip appears through selective memory. You remember details that support your motives, but forget those that weaken them. This forgetting is rarely intentional. It is emotional filtration disguised as logic. The listener who watches closely notices which parts you repeat and which parts you avoid. Repetition reveals emotional weight. Avoidance reveals emotional threat. Albert Bandura once said that the mind protects itself by reconstructing meaning. In speech, reconstruction appears as subtle rewriting of events or intentions. You adjust phrases to fit the version of yourself you want to present. Yet every adjustment exposes what you fear the original version might reveal. You revise your sentences to protect identity, but revision itself becomes the leak. The fifth pattern of slipping appears when you mask emotion with technical language. You replace vulnerable words with safer, colder alternatives. You say concern instead of fear. You say preference instead of desire. You say discomfort instead of anger. The emotional truth remains active underneath, vibrating through your tone and timing. The mismatch between vocabulary and emotion becomes a clear signal. A manipulative thinker recognizes emotional masking immediately. They know masked emotion is more unstable than expressed emotion. They wait for the moment your technical phrasing collapses under emotional pressure. When that collapse happens, your raw motive surfaces without warning. Another slip occurs through contradictory framing. You present two ideas that cannot logically coexist, yet you join them as if they can. You might say you do not care, but you also say you expected better. You might say you trust someone, but you highlight every minor inconsistency. You might say everything is fine, but you emphasize how unfair something felt. These contradictions reveal emotional imbalance, not dishonesty. Imbalance exposes motive more clearly than admission ever could. Once someone understands your contradictions, they know your internal landscape. They know your emotional patterns, your inconsistencies, and your hidden attachments. They can predict what you will defend, what you will surrender, and what will destabilize you. Another slip emerges through involuntary vulnerability. You accidentally reveal insecurity by correcting something too small. You may correct your own tone, your own word, or your own phrasing. The correction shows fear of misinterpretation, even when no threat existed. This fear becomes a signpost pointing directly to your unacknowledged motive. You might think silence protects you from such exposure. Yet silence invites interpretation, and interpretation grows in the absence of clarity. When you speak again, your tension rises, and your slips multiply faster. Suppressed motives return stronger because suppression magnifies emotional charge. Verbal slips also appear when you speak about power, recognition, or fairness. These topics activate deep psychological patterns formed long before adulthood. Your voice tightens, your vocabulary narrows, or your defensiveness rises subtly. Each of these reactions reveals unresolved emotional history. History becomes motive, and motive becomes influence. The fifth type of betrayal emerges through compulsive explanation. You feel an intense need to justify your intention, even without accusation. This need signals internal doubt, not external misunderstanding. A manipulator sees this doubt as a perfectly placed lever. When they push gently, your explanations increase, and each one leaks more truth. Many people believe they express clarity, yet they reveal fear. They believe they express neutrality, yet they reveal resentment. They believe they express control, yet they reveal pressure. The real danger is not the slip itself, but the chain of slips connected across time. A person who listens carefully can map your psyche without questioning you once. They can predict your reactions with frightening precision. They can trigger your emotional responses without raising their voice. The deeper question emerges silently as you speak. If someone already understands where your motives break through your words, how easily can they now shape the direction of your emotional responses? You think you have mastered your speech, yet the final layer exposes what even you avoid seeing. You believe you choose every word consciously, yet your deeper drives speak before awareness forms. You assume you reveal only what you approve, yet your motives mark every sentence with hidden intention. The sixth layer of verbal slipping is the most dangerous because it no longer depends on stress alone. At this stage, your unconscious motives begin guiding your language automatically. You speak with confidence, but confidence does not stop exposure. You speak with logic, but logic does not silence instinct. You speak with caution, but caution cannot hide the patterns you have repeated for years. A verbal slip is not simply a mistake, it is a psychological signature. This signature appears across your tone, your phrasing, your emphasis, your timing, and your corrections. Each element seems harmless alone, but together they reveal the blueprint of your internal world. Machiavelli once said that people betray themselves through the virtues they showcase too strongly. The stronger you project calmness, the more your slips reveal buried tension. The stronger you project fairness, the more your slips reveal concealed resentment. The stronger you project indifference, the more your slips reveal hidden longing. Every exaggerated virtue carries a shadow, and the shadow speaks far louder. The sixth slip emerges through unguarded emotional resonance. You respond too deeply to things that should affect you lightly. You downplay things that should impact you strongly. This imbalance shows unresolved motives guiding your reactions. Your emotional resonance becomes a language of its own, and others learn to read it. Your mind thinks it hides motives by controlling content. But emotion leaks through rhythm, pace, energy, and subtle linguistic vibration. You may speak calmly, yet your pace accelerates at one specific topic. You may sound composed, yet your breath changes when desire or fear activates. These physiological shifts become involuntary markers of motive. They are louder than slips in words because they cannot be rehearsed. Albert Bandura once said that people reveal their truest intentions when they attempt to regulate themselves. Self-regulation creates strain, and strain creates leakage. In this final stage, your leakage becomes predictable. The listener who understands dark psychology no longer waits for mistakes. They wait for the moment you try to look controlled, because control exposes motive faster than chaos. Another advanced slip appears through selective emotional investment. You speak with passion only on topics where your motives feel threatened. You speak with excessive neutrality on topics that hold emotional risk. You shift vocabulary depending on whether you want to distance or align with the idea. These shifts reveal how your inner hierarchy of motives truly operates. A manipulative thinker maps your emotional investments more than your rational claims. Investment shows attachment, and attachment becomes leverage. If they know what attaches your mind to fear or desire, they know how to guide you silently. They do not need persuasion, they need activation. Once activated, you follow predictable emotional pathways. The sixth form of slip also appears through identity protection. You unconsciously shape sentences to preserve your self-image. You interrupt yourself when your words come too close to admitting weakness. You soften your tone when your desire becomes visible. You add intellectual framing when vulnerability attempts to surface. Each of these tiny adjustments reveals what identity you fear losing. Your fear of losing identity becomes the master motive behind all verbal correction. And master motives are the easiest for others to manipulate. If a person knows which identity you guard most, they know exactly which emotional triggers open you. Another subtle slip emerges through moral displacement. You shift responsibility onto vague forces to avoid revealing your internal conflict. You use phrases like circumstances pushed me or things just happened. This displacement shows that your motives and your image are in disagreement. Where there is disagreement, there is fragility. Where there is fragility, influence is effortless. Your verbal slips at this stage no longer expose only emotions. They expose patterns of decision-making. A trained observer learns your threshold for pressure, your sensitivity to rejection, your triggers for defensiveness, your craving for validation, your concealed fears and rivalries. These patterns allow them to predict your choices without guidance. You believe you choose freely, but your slips show otherwise. Your decisions follow emotional circuits that become visible through language. The true danger is quiet. Someone who understands your verbal slips can shape your environment to activate the motives they want. They can trigger insecurity without speaking directly. They can activate desire without offering anything. They can create doubt without criticism. They can strengthen attachment without promise. Your mind responds to signals you do not recognize, because those signals align with your internal map. And this brings the final revelation. Verbal slips are not about exposing secrets to others. They are about exposing secrets to yourself. The motives you tried to hide from the world are often the motives you hide from your own awareness. Your speech reveals this awareness gap with painful accuracy. You can only control what you acknowledge. You can only protect what you understand. You can only strengthen what you confront directly. The mind you think you fully know is a partial version of your real psychological machinery. The question you now face is not about others, it is about you. If your verbal slips have been revealing your motives all along, what happens when you finally start listening to them yourself?